16 players, 8 countries, 5 languages.
I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati.
All right. Happy Friday, guys. Welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I have 2 guests with me tonight, Marco and Jessica, and they are going to have a discussion with us tonight about worker co-op, something I know a lot of you guys have been waiting for. I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So let's go ahead and start with Marco.
Yeah, hi, I'm Marco Padilla. I'm just a local dual power organizer in my city here in Portland, Oregon, and I work with trying to help people start up co-ops. I work on co-ops myself, and I do some other socialist organizing in the city. Yeah.
Awesome. Jessica.
Hi, and I'm Jessica Gordon-Nemhard. I'm a professor at City University of New York on the John Jay campus. I'm professor of community justice and social economic development at John Jay College in the Department of Africana Studies. I also wrote a book called Collective Courage, A History of Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice. A history of African American cooperative economic thought and practice, where I tried to highlight the experiences of African Americans in the co-op movement, co-ops, and thought about how to use co-ops for liberation.
Awesome. So tonight we're going to talk about worker co-ops because I know a lot of you have asked, like, number one, how do you even start a worker co-op? What exactly are worker co-ops? And what I've explained to you guys is that unions are great, but the ultimate goal should be worker cooperatives. So I'm going to piggyback to Marco here. Marco, can you explain to everyone, how do you actually start a worker co-op?
Yeah, there's a few different ways you can start one. It's pretty much the same way that you would start any kind of business, except you wouldn't use something like an investor. You might get investment through the community, where you have like all the people buy into the co-op, so they can join their money together to start it. In Italy, actually, you can take your unemployment claim. And if you join with 9 other workers, they'll give you all 10 workers unemployment at once to be the startup capital. But startup capital is generally the hardest thing for a lot of co-ops to do. This is, here I'm going to present my screen here, if I figure this out. This is the Democracy at Work Institute does every month, the first Friday of every month, they do like a co-op, how to start a co-op webinar. So there's a lot of resources online on how to do it, but generally there's like 3 main areas that people kind of focus on. They focus on the co-op capacity, that's like the framework and the culture of the business development itself, like registering it with the state and getting startup capital, and sort of the ecosystem development, the place where the community that the co-op's going to work in. And this is a great place for unions, and Jessica can talk about this more, but when the union movement was first started, unions and co-ops worked together, and the idea from the Knights of Labor, who was the first labor union, was that they were going to use worker cooperatives as a way to seize the means of production. But so they do this webinar every week, and they really explain how to do it, and then you can sign yourself up for like a free consultation afterwards, and they can kind of like help you start the business up.
Really quick, Marco, a quick question. In reference to the startup capital, typically how much does that require? Like how much does that cost?
It can really depend on the kind of business. So like the business the co-op I'm in is a tech cooperative. So we have like zero startup money. It's just like the computers that we own and starting to get clients and doing business that way. But depending on the business, you might do a startup loan for like $5,000 to $15,000. There's the National Cooperative Bank that is in the U.S. and they will loan to startups. It's very hard for startups in general to get money. So if you can kind of start a business and get it going for a couple of years, have some revenue on the books, have money going in and out of the bank regularly, then you're much more likely to be able to get a loan. And that's true if you're a capitalist or a communist, either way, because it's like banks and credit unions often don't loan to startups as a rule. So that's one of the stickiest points, which is why most of the startups in the country are started up with private investment, vis-a-vis capitalism. So you can just kind of figure out any kind of way, and if you really focus on production, like if you want to eventually have like a grocery store, instead of starting with trying to have a grocery store, you can start with producing and selling food in your community. Because then once you have a couple of years of money in the books in the bank, then you can get the loan to start a bigger store and stuff like that.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in because there is some good news on the financing front, right? I mean, one of the purposes of a co-op is to pool resources, as you said, so you can start if you have a very low capital business that's really more about services and what people already have, then you can pool what resources you have to start something and then use that to leverage raising money in other places. But we also do have a new system now, a nationwide system called Seed Commons. And that is a collective of local co-op loan funds who understand and are supportive of worker co-ops and worker ownership. And they will help at a local level. I forget which cities have them already, but there's the national overriding. It's like a co-op of these co-op loan funds. And then there are also a couple of other co-op loan funds, Shared Capital, Cooperative Fund of New England. So you can find some very worker co-op friendly resources that will even help with startup. But most everybody wants what you call member equity. They want people to put in something of their own. But the other piece that works for worker co-ops is even if you have to put in member equity, you can often pay for it in installments out of your salary once the co-op starts. So even very low income people don't have to have a lot of capital to put in, but they do need to commit to putting in their share as they earn it in the co-op and to using, their own sweat equity and things like that to get the co-op going.
Okay. Well said.
And
Well
also
said.
there's a lot of potential there with the unions as well, because if you have co-ops that are in a union, the union has money and can start businesses themselves, and they can grow their own union membership by starting more and more worker cooperatives. And it's like the idea is we need to not just seize the means of production, but we also have to seize the unions back, because the unions a lot of unions are taken over by the capitalist class, and so we need to work with them to build that cooperative power.
Yeah, two worker co-ops started, well, there's more than that, but just, and I'll go through the history later, but just to follow up on that, there was a worker co-op sewing factory in North Carolina in the 80s and 90s, and there's New Era Windows, a window company in Chicago that's operating now. In both cases, they took over a business that was supposedly failing, right, and that was going to leave their community. And they fought. In the case of New Era Windows, they actually had to fight to get control over their pension fund because the company, as it was leaving, declared bankruptcy, which meant the pension fund was gone. But they actually fought back, and over a 2-year period, they won back control of their pension fund. That helped them to then buy the company. Well, first they had to take it over and whatever, but they eventually were able to create a worker co-op out of it. And the group in the 80s and 90s in North Carolina, again, their sewing company moved out of the country and left them without anything. But luckily they had been unionized, and so they were given back their union pension, and they used that to buy the factory and to start their own worker co-op out of the ashes of the abandoned property. So that's another way where being unionized already helps. And then there's some examples where some of the unions, including for New Era windows, were actually helpful with the workers starting a worker co-op and supporting that.
Why do you feel that some of these unions, because I'm hearing about a lot of wins, right, with unionizing across the country, at least within the past year and a half, why do you feel they're not taking this next step to start a union, worker co-op? Like, do you feel they just don't know about this? Or do you feel that like they're just more comfortable with just being a union? Why aren't they taking this extra step?
Well, some of them are. Communication Workers of America have always been supportive of unions, the IWW, and then SCIU is also right there, the head union for our largest worker co-op in the United States, Cooperative Home Care Associates. So there are actually unions. I guess we don't hear about it, and they're not making a big splash about it. Oh, and the steel workers, right, are also doing union co-op projects. So there's actually a lot happening. There's not a lot of coverage about it, and they're not splashing it all over the place. And I suspect some of it is worry about red baiting and, people accusing them of being too socialist. And then the more conservative unions just aren't that interested, unfortunately, right, in worker ownership. They're more interested in countervailing power. And so I think it matters which kind of union it is and how strong a rank and file they have. The ones that are really connected to the rank and file go back to the early years, like with the Knights of Labor, when they said the power of labor was really in owning our own companies, right? Owning the means of production, owning our own companies, having worker co-ops. That got separated by the 20th century. The co-op movement and the union movements kind of separated, but now in the 21st century, there's more joining again, I would say. Sorry, Marco, I didn't know if you had something to add to that.
Oh yeah, no, that was what I was going to say too. Yeah, the history of the Red Scare, the defeat of the Communist Party, and all of that really drove the two movements apart. But I think they're kind of starting to come back together because we're in a similar place now. We don't have children working, but we are working 8 to 10 or 10 to 12-hour days now. Most people have multiple jobs. All those gains that the union movement gained was because the people had enough. And I think the two movements are starting to come back together because people are seeing that the unionization, the way the unions have gone, is not working anymore for the workers.
Okay, so if we go back to the steps of the slide you had there, or the website you had there of starting a worker co-op. Okay, so co-op capacity development. If you can just walk us through this, Marco. Sure.
Yeah. So this is like the idea of sort of like the social skills around running a business, like the kind of solidarity you need with your coworkers in order to be able to develop a business from the ground up. Typically, this is done by single people with an investor. So this is how that top down begins with the co-op, with the capacity of the business. Like, what kind of things are we going to produce? How are we going to produce it? Sort of getting the team together, and then the business development is the more technical skills around getting the bank account going, managing money, doing bookkeeping. And the ecosystem development is sort of like, say you have you want to start a food company and you want to find food deserts. So you want to organize the people in the community. That would be like the ecosystem that the business lives in.
The other aspect of an ecosystem is also things like supply chains, right? Trying to find local supply chains, other co-op supply chains, working with other co-ops, trying to get credit unions to be supportive, getting, if you're in a housing co-op, getting connections with other kinds of co-ops, other solidarity activities happening in your area, connecting them to the co-op, getting them to support the co-op or be clients or customers of the co-op, that kind of thing. And so it's also about connections, right? Almost like community organizing, right? What are the relationships that you can build both on the economic side and sort of the social side that will help get it started and help keep it going? Because we know that co-ops, one of the reasons why they last longer than other kinds of small businesses, is that they actually make connections, bring ecosystems together, bring people together, support similar activities in their neighborhoods, and all that kind of intergroup support helps to keep the business going. And so co-ops actually are longer lasting than most small businesses, but it's very precarious for any business in our society.
Okay.
Yeah, like a lot of people don't really see it this way, but for me, when I saw it this way, it was really powerful for me, which was that this is like a form of political direct action. Not only are you giving yourself a better livelihood, but you're also taking power away from the capitalist who owns you. You're preventing them from using the profits from the workers for their stupid things like buying yachts and buying politicians. You're seizing that power back for yourself and the community you're in, by the relationships that you have when you're working with other businesses, and the idea that we could have, like in Italy, 40% of the economy in one of the states is worker co-op. That's like real power. Then we have all the money we need for our political organizing. One of the things that I do is I'm the treasurer for some ballot measures that we've gotten passed here in Portland. And, we pay about $65,000 to get universal preschool for all kids in the county. And that's a lot of money for individuals, but that's not a lot of money for business. $60,000 is half of a yacht, right? So like when I go to my downtown city that's on the harbor, I see all these yachts parked there, and I'm like, every one of those is a ballot measure for the people. So it's like, if this is a form of direct action where we can really change our community if we can do it in mass.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to start using that. I love that. The other thing that's so important, the cooperative capacity part, is the teaching how to be an association, right? How to be a mutual, how to make decisions together, how to be a real democracy. Because the other thing is we don't live in a real democracy, and especially our economic systems are not democracies. So we spend most of our waking hours at a job that's not a democracy, that's very hierarchical, where we don't have much say. We have to toe the line. But in a co-op, right, we learn and then we practice how to make decisions with other people, how to make the decisions about everything, what time we come into work, what kinds of benefits we get, how do we divide up the surplus and the profits, what are the work rules, right? We get to participate in that, but we also have to learn, right? We have to relearn, because it's pretty much been beaten out of us through our lives that we don't have a say, or that we shouldn't have a say, or that we don't know enough to run a business. So now we have to learn that we do know enough to run a business, that we know enough to make these decisions about quality of life in our business, and that we can make those decisions with other people. And so we learn how to make group decisions, how to have real democracy, and then we practice it in the co-op. And so that's the other reason why this co-op capacity piece about where, co-ops are both enterprises, businesses, and mutual associations. And so we have to pay attention to both the skills on both sides.
Well said. Well said. So how is this different from, and I asked this question because some of this looks a little bit similar to what someone might see with like a nonprofit or something like that, right? What's the bigger difference here? I know it's a group of people that get together and they decided to start a worker co-op. You get the startup funding for it, and then you decide to work together as a group in a worker co-op, is there a leader? For example, does one person manage the co-op, or does everybody basically have an equal responsibilities? And how is this different? So like for a worker co-op, is there any paperwork that you have to file? So like for a nonprofit, you have to file, I think it's a 501c3, I think. Is there any of that type of paperwork you have to file?
So you do have to you have to decide how to incorporate. For a worker co-op, you can, some states have actual worker co-op incorporation status, and some states you have to operate as an LLC, a limited liability corporation, with co-op bylaws. If you have your bylaws are set up as if you were a co-op, even if your state doesn't have a co-op law, you can be recognized by the government, by the tax authorities as a co-op. So you can either be an LLC or, as I said, I think it's only like 10 states have actual worker co-op legislation for incorporation.
Okay.
And worker co-ops are for-profit companies. So it's not that you're not making a profit, but you're not what we call profit maximizing, right? A capitalist investor corporation is profit maximizing. Their whole purpose is to make a profit for their investors. In a worker co-op, your whole purpose is to make quality work, a decent quality job for people doing a service or creating a product that the community needs. So the whole purpose and vision of the reason why you're a co-op, why you're in business is different, but you're still a for-profit. So you still are making profits. But again, the decision making happens as a group of what you do, how you operate, what you do. Now, worker co-ops are very flexible. Some worker co-ops, all the members actually do similar to other corporations and other nonprofits. They elect a board of directors, and the board of directors hires a manager or a management team. And so in some ways they can be similar. Some worker co-ops are like that, like our largest one, the Cooperative Home Care Associates. Their members all vote on who's going to be on the board, and then the board hires a director, and the director hires the rest of the managers, right? But they have a process, but because they're all owned and run by the workers get to say what kind of management they want. And they also have a process for a lot of the workers to move up into middle management positions and things like that. So they're trying to create quality jobs at every level and provide a lot of career ladder opportunities. Then you have other worker co-ops that are what we call self-managed. Every member of the co-op is on the board, and the board has a system either of committees work or a management team or co-directors, right? Again, the group decides what kind of management they want, how hierarchical or how horizontal they want it. So it's a choice. The main point is that everybody gets to vote, right? Everyone gets to vote on the policies. Everyone gets to vote on what the governance structure is. It's not imposed, right? And the workers are in charge.
Okay, that makes sense. Could you explain a little bit here in reference to the workers own a piece? So let's say there's 10 people and they have a worker co-op. Does that mean that each member owns a piece of the company? And if so, what happens if a member of the co-op decides to leave? Do they get a share that comes along with them? Like, do they take that share with them?
Do you want to do that one, Marco, or you want me to?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So generally speaking, the co-op, for it to be a co-op, then it's equally owned. So every member owns the business collectively. And depends on how you write the bylaws. You can write it where when you leave, your share gets bought out, or you can sell your share, or give your share to the next worker. It's kind of like a bit choose your own adventure. You can build it any way you want. But to your previous question too, I'd like to just point out real quick that even nonprofits can be organized capitalistically. I've known what's often called the nonprofit industrial complex is actually just capitalism in in those nonprofits. So the 501c3 or 501c4 can be organized cooperatively, where everybody owns it equally. I've seen a lot of nonprofits where the director makes a living wage, but then everybody else makes minimum wage. So if it was collectively organized and controlled, then it would be more equitable. But yeah, but for your most recent question, yeah, you can organize it any way you want, and generally the ownership has to be equally shared. So that's how that differs from like an ESOP, which is an employee stock ownership program. In an ESOP, it's still a capitalist business, even though the ownership is a little bit more spread out. There's still a small minority of people who are the owners, even in an ESOP. So that's why worker co-op is a worker-owned and controlled business.
Yeah, another way to understand it is what we call one share, one vote, one member, one vote in a co-op, in a worker co-op, whereas in an investor corporation, it's one share, one vote. So even in an ESOP, which is still an investor-led corporation, even if the employees own 50 or 60% of the stock, each stock gives you one vote. So some employees, if they've been there longer, could have 30 shares and somebody else could have 10 or 1. And then the original investors could still have 100 shares. And so each share gives you a vote. So the people who have 100 shares get 100 votes. So again, money talks. In a worker co-op, even if you have invested some money in the co-op, it doesn't give you a share vote. Your vote is because you're a member. And so one member, one vote. So that's, again, the equality. So you can invest money in your own co-op. You can do other stuff, but that doesn't give you the governance share. It just gives you an investment, in the business. And so again, that's why we keep talking about this democratic ownership and democratic governance, and a way for people to really be in labor is really in charge of what's happening in the business, and labor is in the driver's seat, right? Because that's the whole purpose of a worker co-op, to make sure the employees, the people who are doing the work, are the ones who get the say in running the business, who get the ownership status, so that they can really control what's happening.
Okay. And Marco, could you talk a little bit about your worker co-op?
Yeah. So we have a worker cooperative IT company. It's called Rose Coded LLC. And we're still in the startup phase. We're about 1.5 years old. We've got a few clients that we work on regularly. There's about 4 of us right now, and there's probably about enough work for just one full-time worker, and we're all kind of spreading it amongst each other. And we sort of prioritize the person who doesn't have employment. 3 of us are working full-time for capitalists, as we're building the ship as we're flying it, kind of thing. And we just unionized, so we joined our local CWA, so now we're a union co-op. And one of the projects I'm trying to do there is we're working with the Drivers Cooperative from New York City, which is a worker co-op.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Direct competitor to Lyft and Uber. And so I want to work with my CWA union, which organizes drivers. So it's sort of like I organize the drivers to grow my union. It gives me business to my co-op, and we kill Uber and Lyft. Right, so it's like win-win-win all around, and so that's kind of like the main projects we're working on right now, is just kind of getting the business started, trying to get as much tech work as we can, and it kind of grew out of our local DSA chapter, because we have our local DSA chapter has an IT working group, and it's like we do all the IT for our local chapter. And we're like, why are we doing this we all work for capitalists, why don't we all join together and start a business and seize the need for production,
So what I gather is, like, it seems like with worker co-ops, it's really what you make it. It's really like in finding a group of people that you feel are going to be the right group to work with. But it seems like it's more flexible than I thought it would be. And it seems like it's just really what you make it.
Right. Yeah. Within, right, the parameters are that there are like values and principles of being a co-op that you have to meet. That's where we talk about these co-op bylaws, right? So the values of co-ops are about solidarity, equity, equality, caring for others, caring for community, right? Things like that. And then there's actually officially 7 principles of cooperatives about open membership, returns to member participation rather than capital, concern for community, co-ops working with other co-ops, continuous education. And so there's those parameters. They have to be a values-based business, right, that is focused much more on people and community than on profit maximizing, right? So, but within that sort of big box, there's lots of flexible ways that you can structure yourself. And I can give you some other examples of structures. Some of the governance by committee worker co-ops mean, like there's a Rainbow Grocery in San Francisco. They operate by committee. So there's a steering committee of representative from all the other committees, right? And the committees are really the departments at the store. So the produce department is one committee, and all the people who work in produce make the decisions about produce, what to buy, how to display it, all that kind of stuff. You know, dairy does dairy, canned goods does canned goods, bakery, right? So they run it in that way. And it makes, if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. So the people who are working in that area make the decisions about that area. And then they come together to the steering committee for all the other things that are store-wide, like hiring practices, how somebody becomes a member, right? How they do their taxes and all that. So the steering committee, you know, figures that all those things out, or maybe even also creates a hiring or an HR committee, things like that. And so again, it's decentralized but coordinated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have even more decentralized. One of my favorite examples was a peep show in San Francisco, Lusty Ladies. With sex workers, they were dancers in a peep show, right? They tried to unionize. They actually won their union drive, but the employer, the owner, said he didn't want a union shop and was going to sell the company out from under them, even though they had just unionized. They decided they should buy the company themselves, and so the dancers, the bouncers, and the janitors bought the company together. So a really interesting combination. So basically all the employees own the company together, and they also wanted to self-manage. So but their method of self-management was to rotate the 2 manager positions. There's a day and a night manager. And so what they did among the dancers, they rotated the 2 management positions every 6 months. They changed who did it. And so that meant a couple of things. One, it's a very stressful job. And so they reduced the stress by rotating it. Also, because it's so stressful and was so essential, it made a little more money than the rest of the jobs. And so they rotated who got the most, every 6 months, different people got to have the stress and the extra money. They also had other kind of rules to equalize where people got the most tips and things. They made sure people had access to those opportunities. They shared that. They believed in healthcare and that kind of thing. The janitors, and as I said, and the bouncers also had a say in all this and had their own self-management aspects on their own committees where they were self-managing and things like that. So it's really fascinating when you look at all these different worker co-ops. Again, the principles and values are all the same, but they figure out what works for their industry, their experiences, their place in history or whatever. They figure out what kind of self-management or management structure works for them. And so that's why we mean it's very flexible, but within a set of kind of rules and expectations.
Awesome. There are 2 questions here. The first one is from Roman. Can you have a worker co-op as a B Corp? Roman,
Yeah.
Does that mean business corp or? business corporation, maybe? Go ahead, Marco.
A B Corp is a new special designation. You're a socially responsible business. So you're like a hybrid between a nonprofit and a for-profit business.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. So that's a yes. And then we have a question on Rockfin from Roger Meadows. I'll go ahead and take that one, Eric. Jessica, does New York State have any co-op laws on the books? If so, what are they? Also, I'd like to create a new state agency in Albany and call it Cooperative Business Administration that would do for co-ops what the Fed SBA does for small business counseling, tax resources, a voice in government, government contracting, consultation, education, training, financing, research, all to make it easier to form co-ops.
So yes, New York State actually has one of the better co-op laws, and they have worker co-op law as well as other co-op laws. Those were all redone in the 90s, I believe. So New York State is a very worker co-op friendly state. Also, New York City in particular has a worker co-op initiative. They've been putting over 2 million, which isn't a huge amount, a year. The city council has been allocating, I guess the last 5 or 6 years, about 2 million or 2 to 3 million a year to do worker co-op education and startup and help with financing. And that meant that the city has started a co-op division of their small business administration. So in New York City, there's actually a division that understands co-ops and helps people to start a co-op. Now, I don't know about statewide. I do know that there's some SBA around the state that are also doing co-op education and co-op support. I don't know if there's a statewide initiative or a statewide division like New York City has. And Marco, seems like you know something too, so you can jump in. I'm happy for you to jump in.
Sure, yeah. There's quite a few like co-op incubators around the country. Like there's one in Olympia, Washington. You can start up like a local chapter of the Democracy at Work Institute. Like if you ask them to take their branding and everything, they totally want that for sure. So there's a lot of co-op incubators around the country that you could emulate and talk to and see how they got funding. See how they got started. And it's a great idea because, yeah, if we can get things into the law like the Marcora law, where we can take our unemployment money and use that as startup capital, that would be a great thing to do. So, yeah, that's a great idea, Roger.
I'm going to share that link for Democracy at Work because that's good to know that you can do local chapters of that. I wasn't aware of that. But some people may be interested in doing that. I have one more question for the both of you. What advice would you give to someone who's trying to start a worker co-op?
Well, I would definitely say, most co-ops that I studied started with a study group, people coming together and saying, this is what we need something, and starting to learn about co-ops, learning about it together, because learning together is like the beginning of having a business together and figuring out how to get along together. So study your situation, study the industry you want to be in, and study cooperatives and cooperative economics. There's also the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, which is the U.S. Trade Association for Worker Co-ops. I'm actually helped to found that in 2004. So we're coming up on 20 years soon. And they also have a very active website and a lot of supports that they can give the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-op. It's actually usworker.coop. usworker.coop is the URL. And so they're also very helpful. And then, as Marco said, there's actually a lot of different co-op development. A lot of states now have co-op development centers. Some of them know worker co-ops better than others. But if you look up just sort of co-op development in your state, or if you go to, I think we also have ed.coop, has a lot of resources. It'll connect you to a lot of the websites where they're doing development and that kind of thing. So really do your homework, but do it with other people. Talk it through. And then get the advice from the people who are giving technical assistance that we've already started to mention.
Yeah, and
Awesome.
try to find other co-ops that are doing either something similar or in the same industry as what you're doing, and just reach out to them and be like, hey, can you help us? Hey, can we become one of your vendors? Because because businesses have to spend money too, and if they're spending money at other capitalist businesses to get supplies, that's just money that's leaving the dual power. So we need to cooperate with other businesses, other co-ops as well, to grow our power together. Yeah.
And study. There's been lots of good learning journeys. Go and study another worker co-op, especially if it's either in the industry you want or if they're doing the governance the way you want. Go ask them if you can come and spend a day with them or 2 days with them and shadow them, see what they're doing, see what they'll share, ask them questions. It's a great way to really see it in action, and then to figure out what's going to work for your group.
That's right. Well said. Yeah, I think sometimes people think when they're trying to start something, they have to reinvent the wheel. And sometimes you can just go observe another group, and see how they've done it or how they're doing it. So thank both of you so much. Roger does want you to know, Jess, he said he was in a Zoom meeting with Mo Macklin on Wednesday. So I don't know Mo.
And Mo is with the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. Mo is a staffer at the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Well, thank both of you for coming on. Thank you for educating all of us. And hopefully you guys, those of you watching, you can take this information. I know some of you have been interested in wanting to do this. So you can take this information and get a group of people going and get something moving. But thank you guys so much for coming on.
Sounds great. Thanks for all you do, and happy holidays, everybody.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye. All right, guys. Okay. We were in a class session. Great info. Thank you so much, Peggy. Great info. Thanks, Jessica and Marco. Yes, absolutely. Bill Bradley, thanks. Great guest. Absolutely. We'll definitely clip this too, so you guys can reference this again. I'm going to take those links. I know I put a couple links in the chat while they were talking of resources. I'm going to go back and copy those links and put those links in the details portion of this video so that you guys can refer back to those resources. But yeah, I've been wanting to have that discussion. Like I said, there's a lot of cool things that you can do. It's just a matter of you got to find someone sometimes that's already doing it, and then to explain to you how you can do it too. So again, even when it comes to something like worker co-ops, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, you guys. You can take something that's already established, observe that group or that organization, and then go from there, right? Okay, let's go ahead and quickly shout out patrons, and then we're going to get into other stories that we have tonight. We will do call-in tonight. So here we go. All right, shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you, guys. If you're interested in being a patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and the ultimate. All of their names are listed here, and they're also scrolling across the bottom of the screen on the ticker there. Thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate it. And I also do want to shout out a new Sabby patron. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up to the well-dressed nerd. I love that name. Hello. I love it. It's so cute. Thank you so much, guys. It really does help me out. Thanks so much. There's every now and then there's a name that just like, pow. It just jumps right out at you. Okay. What are we discussing tonight, ladies and gentlemen? Let's go ahead and share that thumbnail. Let's get into it. All right, tonight we are discussing Briahna Joy Gray questions Ro Khanna. Interesting discussion there, especially if you want to hear an update about the student loan cancellation that was blocked. They discussed that as well, so we're gonna hit on that tonight. We're also going to discuss Pramila Jayapal has hope. Pramila Jayapal is talking about the new progressives that have entered Congress and some of the accomplishments that have been made along the way. But there's some things that Pramila has said in this interview that are not exactly true. So we're going to talk about that as well. We're also going to discuss Nancy Pelosi exits. What is happening? We're going to get into that story. We're also going to take a look back at a time when Nancy Pelosi actually had a little bit more progressive ideas. And of course, worker co-op were just here. So let's go ahead and get into it. Doobie doo. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with this Pramila Jayapal story here. Let's give a huge shout out here to Case Study QB. He clipped this. I'm glad he clipped this interview. I think I probably I don't think I would have seen this because I don't watch Joy Reid, but Case Study clips a lot of her stuff. But Joy Reid had an interview here with Pramila Jayapal talking about what has happened post midterms. Republicans are taking back the House. Obviously, there are new progressives that are now in the House as well. And Pramila Jayapal is going to discuss some of the accomplishments or what she feels are accomplishments from the Biden administration, and that she is very hopeful. But there are some things I do want to point out here from this interview that I do think she was not being 100% correct about. I think she was being disingenuous with part of this interview. So let's go ahead and get into the readout.
The 2022 midterms were a huge success for progressive Democrats. Of the 18 candidates the Progressive Caucus endorsed this cycle, 16 have won their races so far, including
I wanted to pause this here. So these are some of the new progressive Congress members here. And I know for some reason this is a little bit blurred, but I believe I went over these already in another interview. Some of the ones that you probably already know is Maxwell Frost and of course Summer Lee. They have been talked about like heavily. I do want to point out something here though. I think there's one of them. I'm trying to remember the names. Like I said, it's a little blurry. I forget, but most of the new progressive members of Congress sided with the state of Israel and are against BDS. And I told you that this is something that is seeming to become a deal breaker, whether or not you support BDS or not, right? So Maxwell Frost, and you'll have to go back and watch this clip. It was a part of Breaking Points. Ryan Grimm talked about this. Oh, Case Study sent me that clip. Maybe I can show it later if I have time. But Maxwell Frost was actually one of the people that was like an activist for Palestinian rights, and then decided to switch over and become, anti-BDS, which is like this thing now where I guess if you want a seat in Congress or whatever, it's like you have to say you're against BDS, right? And if you don't say that you're against BDS, then it's like you have organizations like AIPAC that will put up a lot of money to try to prevent you from winning that race, right? So for me, and I told you guys, I stand firmly on this. For me, I support the Palestinian people. I support their right to have their freedom. And I do support BDS. And so for me, if I see a candidate, I don't care if you are progressive or not. If you tell me this is a red flag for me, if you tell me, hey, I'm for Medicare for all right, cool. Hey, I'm for canceling student loan debt. I'm for paid family leave. Cool. Hey, I'm against BDS. Pause. That's a test for me. That's a test, because if you're willing to throw Palestinian people under the bus, what are you willing to do to people like me? And some of the African-American progressive candidates have sold out with this too. Let's just be clear. So let's go back into the video, but I wanted to point that out.
the first Gen Z Congress member, Maxwell Frost of Florida, former Austin City Council member Greg Casar, and a trio of state representatives, Delia Ramirez in Illinois, Jasmine Crockett in Texas, and Summer Lee, the first black woman elected to the House from Pennsylvania, making this upcoming Democratic caucus the most progressive that we have seen in decades. Oh, okay, but there's one caveat. Republicans have officially taken control of the House. NBC News projects that they have reached that 218-seat threshold with a couple of races still uncalled. But even if it comes down to a majority of just one Republican, it does still give people like Kevin McCarthy and Marjorie Greene leverage over legislation, investigations, and funding the government over the next 2 years.
And by the way, I mentioned this earlier on RBN, but by the way, there were 31 Republicans that voted against, in a separate meeting, have voted against Kevin McCarthy becoming speaker. Have decided, nope, we don't want the dude. And the Freedom Caucus has decided to say, we have a list of demands that McCarthy is going to have to fulfill in order to get our vote. So now you have the Republicans in the House basically trying to force the vote, which is what the squad was supposed to do in reference to Nancy Pelosi. And they decided not to do. And they had that leverage. So Nancy Pelosi is now gone anyway. So you have to ask yourself, or they should ask themselves, was it worth it in the end? Let's carry on.
So what can this new larger group of progressives accomplish? Well, joining me now is Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington, who is the chair of the House Progressive Caucus. We have a very adorable picture. I'm going to show it to you. This is Maxwell Frost's selfie that he took. There you guys are. You guys are looking great. You look very happy. But now that you know that you're looking at a Kevin McCarthy speakership, are you less happy?
Well, of course. I mean, there's no question we would have been happiest if we could have held the House and done the rest of the agenda, which clearly the country responded to, Joy. I mean, when you look at the election results, and here's the thing, if you promise a bunch of things and you put together a diverse coalition, and then you deliver on things like climate change and student debt cancellation and the American Rescue Plan, people get excited and they want to come out and vote for you. If you say we're going to codify abortion rights and voting rights, so there's a lot of the agenda that we still have to get done.
We need to backtrack here just a second.
The speakership, are you less happy?
Well, of course. I mean, there's no question we would have been happiest if we could have held the House and done the rest of the agenda, which clearly the country responded to, Joy. I mean, when you look at the election results, and here's the thing, if you promise a bunch of things and you put together a diverse coalition, and then you deliver on things like climate change and student debt cancellation and the American Rescue Plan, people get excited. And
did you notice she said student loan cancellation? So she just going to leave out the fact, by the way, this is after the midterms, just to be clear. She just going to leave out the fact that a federal drug blocked it and struck it down? How is she going to, how do you leave that out? And by the way, this just happened. How do you leave out, yes, student loan debt cancellation, which, you know, a federal judge just came in and blocked that? How did she not mention that? This is how you gaslight the American people, because people who are not really paying attention to what's going on in reference to student loan like cancellation, if they only just watch this episode, they have no idea what is going on behind the scenes, that a federal judge has blocked it. So it's easy to just watch something like this and say, man, the Democrats did a lot. She doesn't even mention it. She acts like it's still happening. It's been blocked. Listen to this. Watch.
they want to come out and vote for you. If you say we're going to codify abortion rights and voting rights. So there's a lot of the agenda that we still have to get done.
And they're not codifying abortion right. Like she's talking about. So here's the thing. Pramila is talking about promises that they made, but she's talking about the promises as though they were accomplished. That's the gaslighting part. She's talking about it as though they actually got these things done. They did not get them done. And Joy Reid just kind of goes along with it like, where's the pushback? Let's go on. There's more.
But I will tell you that the power of the populist progressive movement across the country is clear. Yeah. It's clear with these candidates who are not just candidates that won in deep blue districts. Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to this chart right here. Progressive agenda. So they have check marks of the things that have been accomplished, right? So American Rescue Plan, yes. Largest investment in climate in U.S. history, check mark. Cap on prescription drug prices, check mark. Why is there a check mark for student loan debt relief? It was blocked. And we're going to get into this discussion with the interview with Briahna Joy Gray and Ro Khanna as well, because Ro Khanna asked him, Briahna asked Ro Khanna about that. And it's just hilarious to me. This is not a check mark. That shouldn't be a check mark. This is not accomplished. You know, this is like, what is it? Zombie in the air? LMOL, this is ridiculous. Like, it just, what? Like, I don't know. It's like for those of you who like to cook, and like, I like to cook, right? You know, it's like you're about to make cupcakes and you mix up the batter. You put the batter in the cupcake pan, but you never put the pan in the oven. It's like that. Do you get cupcakes if you don't put the pan in the oven? No, you don't. Let's go back in.
With these candidates who are not just candidates that won in deep blue districts, they are candidates who won in very competitive frontline districts, like in Pennsylvania. In Oregon, we got 2 progressives elected in frontline districts in Oregon. And it matches the populist ballot initiatives that won across the country. Right? Like legalizing marijuana, raising the minimum wage, capping interest rates on medical debt. These are all things that went, expanding Medicaid in a state like South Dakota.
Absolutely. These are all things that passed in the states. These are not things that have passed on the federal level. Thank you for proving my point, Pramila, that you get more accomplished when it comes to progressive policies through the states. If you have a state like South Dakota, a red state, that has just passed Medicaid expansion, what does that tell you? If you have a state like Nebraska that just passed $15 minimum wage, when your own Senate won't even pass $15 minimum wage on the federal level, what does that tell you? So Pramila Jayapal is just proving my point. You're better off doing shit through the local level. Now, that is not to say that you don't need legislation passed on the federal level. Yes, absolutely you do. But she is basically proving the point that I've been telling you guys, that if you want to get progressive policies passed, you have a faster chance of doing it on the local level. Thank you, Pramila.
So these are the things that won. And I think the lesson for us here is we might have to be an opposition party in the House with Republican leadership, last line of defense, but we also have to be a proposition party. We have to show people what we stand for, give people hope that if we get into office, we will do what we did again in this last term, pass more stuff that lifts working people, poor people, people of color up.
Well, but the problem is, how are you going to pass more? She said pass more stuff. How are you going to pass more policies now that the Republicans have control over the House? And even when you were passing those policies in the House, they would fail in the Senate. And that's something that needs to be addressed. Like, you can't sit here and just pretend like you still have control of the House, because you don't. So I think she's being disingenuous here to sit here and make people think, yeah, we're just going to pass more stuff. No, you're not. I just told you guys, the Freedom Caucus, they're already rising up against Kevin McCarthy's possibility of being speaker. They're already coming with the list of demands. You think they're going to let your policies get through? I don't know.
Here's the thing. So I mean, I know student loan debt relief. I'll take that one for just a moment, because I know for a lot of people, not just young people, but folks who can't buy a house because they still have it was a big deal. The fear now is that the vengeful other side, that their goal will be to try to take away those things, to somehow repeal that legislation, to go after that, because they're very much against it. They filed lawsuits about it. Is there enough of a Democratic threshold and enough of a crossover sort of normie Republican threshold to hang on to the game?
Well, the line of defense is going to be in the Senate and the White House, right? So, I mean, we may not be able to hold all the wins in the House. And in fact, what we might get in the House, I hate this, but what we might get is a really sharp contrast. Republicans trying to strip Social Security and Medicare, right?
Isn't it weird that they think that's a winning idea, that they're going to make old people poor?
Why do they think?
Joe Biden wanted to strip Social Security and Medicare once upon a time, too. Joy's not going to mention that, though.
That, stripping abortion rights is popular. Have they seen the polling across the country? I mean, I don't know that this is all going to be logical. And they're going to have a very slim margin in the House, which means that somebody tried to compare the Freedom Caucus and the Progressive Caucus, and I said, oh, I'm sorry, they're totally different.
Very different.
The Progressive Caucus is a caucus of yes. We know how to govern. We know how to push. We'll push. But we know how to govern. We know how to land the plane. We know how to get stuff done. We have real values that drive us.
The same Progressive Caucus that decided not to endorse Nina Turner's candidacy. That's the same Progressive Caucus that knows how to push. This is interesting to me because it's just, she's making the Progressive Caucus sound like it's more progressive than it actually is. And it's not. Anytime you have, and I hate to bring him up all the time, but this is an obvious one. Anytime you have Ted Lieu is a part of the Progressive Caucus. Jim Clyburn is a part of the Progressive Caucus. How is that? They're not progressive. But she's making it seem like, oh yeah, the Progressive Caucus, we're in there and we're fighting, we're pushing, and we're really getting things done. The same Progressive Caucus wouldn't even support the actual progressive candidate, which was Nina Turner. Shontel Brown is not progressive. Shontel Brown is corporate. But that's the same Progressive Caucus that is actually pushing and fighting back. The same Progressive Caucus that decided to retract that letter, that Ukraine letter calling for diplomacy. That's the same caucus that's supposed to be pushing and fighting back. Okay.
Freedom Caucus is a caucus of no. They don't know how to govern. I don't know what they stand for, and they really want to blow things up. And so I think that's the fight.
No, whoa, let's go back here. So now she's going to talk about the Freedom Caucus. So listen to this.
Sorry, they're totally different.
Very different.
The Progressive Caucus is a caucus of yes. We know how to govern. We know how to push. We'll push. But we know how to govern. We know how to land the plane. We know how to get stuff done. We have real values that drive us. The Freedom Caucus is a caucus of no. They don't know how to govern. I don't know what they stand for. And they really want to blow things up. And
the Freedom Caucus, she doesn't know what they stand for. They don't know how to govern. These are the same people that right now are trying to use their leverage to push Kevin McCarthy to agree to their demands in order for their vote for speaker. They don't know how to govern. You don't know what they stand for. These are the people trying to use their leverage, which is something that the progressives have not done. The squad did not use their leverage to force the vote for Medicare for all against Nancy Pelosi's speakership. The progressives have not used their leverage when it came to passing legislation and holding up legislation. So I'm not a fan of the Freedom Caucus here, but the Freedom Caucus seems to be willing to use their leverage, which is something that the progressives were not willing to do. But Pramila Jayapal tells you they don't know how to govern, and she doesn't know what they stand for.
so I think that's the fight you're going to see now between the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and maybe some more, moderate members who might have won in blue districts. They're going to have to run again in 2 years. And they're going to have to decide, do they want to be the party of Donald Trump and continue to do that, or do they actually want to try and work with us to get some things
I think
done?
they stand for impeaching Hunter Biden, even though he's not president. But let's go on to the lame duck. I have to talk lame duck. Sorry for my audience. I got to do some nerdy stuff here with the Congresswoman. The lame duck then now becomes really important. Because it is the last chance for those who are not familiar with the way kind of it works, is that you guys now have the current caucus is still in place until the new Congress comes in January. So there's a possibility that you guys can get some priorities done. What would be at the top of the list? Because we know that there's an issue with DACA. And there might be an opening. We're hearing some reporting that there might be an opening in the Senate to do something on DACA. Voting rights would be great, because obviously, clearly, we need some work on that.
She mentions DACA, voting rights. Listen to this.
And police reform, I know, was still left on the table. What do you think could, in theory, get done in the lame duck?
Well, immigration.
Notice she didn't mention healthcare. You guys catch that? She mentioned DACA, voting rights, and police reform. She didn't even mention healthcare. So that lets you know how much what they really think is important to them.
DACA and farm worker modernization. I mean, those two populations are bipartisan. They both got bipartisan votes. So the hope is that we can get to something that we can pass in this lame duck session with this Senate and this House. We also do need to make sure to take some tools that they're going to use to hold us hostage off the table. So that's the debt ceiling.
Yep.
You know, we got to
that's
take
huge.
the debt ceiling off the table so they don't try to strip abortion rights again and reproductive health care from us. Well, they've stripped abortion rights, but reproductive health care from us. And then we're going to have to pass some appropriations bills because that's what funds the government, and that needs to get done also.
But let me give Speaker Pelosi.
Well, the Supreme Court are the ones that stripped abortion rights, though. That came from the Supreme Court, Pramila.
Her flowers. I mean, I think that history will look upon her as the greatest House Speaker really in modern history since Sam Rayburn. I mean, there isn't anyone who's been more accomplished. You know, they can say whatever they want about it. This lady gets the job done.
She does.
The question I think that kind of hangs over is if she's done so much, does she drop the mic?
Right.
And does she say, you know what, I have done so much. I mean, between passing Obamacare, all of the things Biden has gotten through, she shepherded through. We talked about that very difficult infrastructure bill. She got that through. Do you...
She's done so much, and yet the American people still don't have health care. She's done so much, and yet still everyone does not have health care in this country. And I'm bringing up that example for a reason, because there's something I'm going to show you later on when I get to the Pelosi story. Hold on to that. Hold on to the health care piece, because that is very crucial.
Expect her to remain, and are obviously dealing with her husband and what the horrors that happened to him. God bless him. What do you think? Do you think she stays in?
I really don't know, and I think she can probably do whatever she wants. I think, you know, she is a phenomenal.
She can do it.
Well, she was right about that. Nancy Pelosi can do whatever she wants. Apparently so.
Do it in heels, by the way.
She can. And I'll tell you, I've traveled with her. I've had the honor of going on delegations overseas. She is incredible. I do think that there's a hunger across the caucus to, you know, sort of bring more people in and things like that. But if she wants to be speaker, I mean, minority leader is what it will be now that we're in the minority. I'm still trying to get used to that, Joy. But, you know, I think that she will, she'll probably be able to do that. So let's see what happens. They do not have an accomplished speaker the way we had Speaker Pelosi. They have Kevin McCarthy, who is not going to be able to bring that caucus, in my view, together. They're going to fight with each other. It is going to be, instead of Dems in disarray, which always used to be a problem when we were described that way, this is Republicans in ruin, right? Like they are.
No, you guys are still that way. That part's funny to me. She said, instead of Dems being in disarray, remember how that was no, that's still a problem. That's still a problem. You guys have just learned how to silence certain people. That's why those things are happening. That's why. But it was really interesting to me how Joy could not even push back. She couldn't push back on the lies, you guys. She didn't even challenge her on the reference to the student loan debt cancellation. No pushback, no nothing. No codifying abortion. Those things have not happened. So it was really interesting and frustrating to me when I first watched that clip, because I was just thinking to myself, like, she is seriously going to sit here and pretend like those things happened when they did not happen. And that is the reason why Joy Reid will continue to get those interviews, because she's not going to actually challenge them. She's going to say just enough so that she still maintains access. That's access journalism. Very few politicians will come on if they know you're going to heavily challenge them. Very few. Let's go to some of the comments in the chat. Ed Kid, Sabby, I just saw a KRTD Media do a recap on your take of status quo disingenuous tweets about RBN. Sabby, you brought the receipts. Salute. Thank you so much, Kid. It's something I usually have a lot of. Thank you for the super chat. Brent, can you block someone from sending a message through super chat? I don't know what that means. I don't know if can you block someone from sending a message through super chat? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know. I'm not a moderator. But I don't know how you should be able to see. Let me see something. At the bottom of the chat, you should be able to see the super chat $. If you don't see that, it could be either an app issue or it could be you might have to refresh or something. I don't know. YouTube's weird sometimes. Jed, Boston in the house, Hyde Park. What's up, Jed? What's up? Steven, great show as usual. Wondering if RBN could be or maybe is worker-owned co-op. I like the concept, having learned about it from Dr. Wolf. That is something that we have talked about among many other things. But you will be the first to know if we do. But we have talked about that. Robert says, bye, Felicia. Israel, Sabby Sabs, don't know if you touched on it. Did Massachusetts pass Medicare for all? So Massachusetts had a ballot question. It was question number 5. I did cover the story. It was question number 5. And it was on the ballot in certain districts. So, for example, it wasn't even on the ballot for my district. So I couldn't vote for it. But it was for single payer healthcare, and it's through a group called Mass Care, an organization here. They were going to be on today. We had to reschedule. They will be on not next Monday, but the following Monday to talk more about that. But even that basically was a chance to get the votes to show that the support for it was there. And then from there, they would still have to pass it in the state house. That's the thing. It would still have to pass through state legislation. I do know that they did have a lot of state legislatures sign on to support it before they went out to get the signatures. So then I guess I'm assuming here, because like I said, they haven't been on yet. The next step would probably be to contact those state legislators and say, hey, these are the results, the percentage results. You need to put this forward for a vote. But thanks so much for asking that. Thanks for the super chat, Lorez. Progressive co-opt by Dems. They co-op any movement. This is true. And thank you for the super sticker, Robert. And what's going on, Robin? Hey, Robin says, hello, everyone. All right, let's move on into our next story now. This is the discussion here between Briahna Joy Gray and Khanna. Like I said, she did ask him about the student loan debt blockage. And I want you guys to hear what he has to say. She also discussed this issue with Nancy Pelosi being speaker as well. So let's check this out.
The Congressional Progressive Caucus welcomed nearly a dozen new members this week after a majority of candidates they endorsed for this year's midterm elections were victorious. Representative Pramila Jayapal, chair of the CPC, said that this will be, quote, the most progressive Democratic caucus in decades, with over 100 members helping the group gain more power to deliver actual change on key issues such as student debt, child tax credit, expanding Medicaid, antitrust reform, and more.
Joining us now to discuss is Congressman from California and member of the Progressive Caucus, Khanna.
Did you guys see how his facial expression? Watch. I'm sorry. This is kind of funny. Watch this.
Child tax credit, expanding Medicaid, antitrust reform, and more.
Joining us now to discuss.
He pulled a Sabby. Like sometimes, like if I'm on another show, I might be looking down at something or reading something, and then next thing you know, the camera's on you. So then you look up and you're like, I'm sorry, it's kind of funny.
That's Progressive Caucus, Khanna.
Oh, I don't know what happened here. It was playing and then okay. Let's try it again.
Joining us to discuss is Congressman from California of the Progressive, Khanna. Welcome.
Okay, Type VNC is messing up. Sorry, hold on. Let me do a refresh. Sometimes that helps when I refresh it. There we go. All right, let's try this again. But wait for it, guys. I'm sorry. It's kind of funny when you see the expression.
The Congressional Progressive Caucus welcomed nearly a dozen new members this week after a majority of candidates they endorsed for this year's midterm elections were victorious. Representative Pramila Jayapal, chair of the CPC, said that this will be, quote, the most progressive Democratic caucus in decades, with over 100 members helping the group gain more power to deliver actual change on key issues such as student debt, child tax credit, expanding Medicaid, antitrust reform, and more.
Joining us now to discuss is Congressman from California and member of the Progressive Caucus, Khanna. Welcome.
I told you.
Thanks for having me back on.
So Representative Robbie just ran through a couple of issue areas that progressives might be excited about, but having lost the House, people are, I think, rightly focused on some of the things that Joe Biden promised to do via executive order, like student debt cancellation, which has recently hit a hang-up in the courts. Student debt advocates at Strike Debt, like Asher Taylor, have pointed out that if Biden had not means tested the program and had used the compromise and settlement authority that exists under the Higher Education Act instead of the HEROES Act, which relies on an emergency COVID status for the debt to be canceled, then he would not have encountered the legal obstacles that he's encountered now. What do you say to people who say, what difference does it make to have more progressives in office if we can't get Biden to follow through on these basic promises that he could enact via executive order?
Boom. Okay, so way to start off the discussion because I was like, first question out of the gate. What do you have to say about Joe Biden's student loan cancellation not working out because he didn't do it the proper way, which he should have done it through the Higher Education Act, and he tried to do it through the HEROES Act, and he was warned already about this and knew the right way to do it and decided not to do it. First question out of the gate. And I think that's very important because here's something that you guys may not realize. Khanna, obviously, he's one of those people that doesn't have a lot of time, right? Like even when I interviewed him, like I knew he only had a certain amount of time. And you're going to have a lot of questions for him because he is one of the few people in Congress that is willing to come on to independent media. So Bree did the right thing here by let me get the most pressing question out first. And that was something that I look back on when I interviewed him. I should have asked him first about Assange. I should have asked him first about Ukraine. And I had those questions at the end of my list and I didn't have time to get to it. So kudos to Bree for starting out with the most important question first. Like, let's go ahead and get this done. Now listen to his response.
Well, the progressives in Congress in the last one helped with the largest climate investment in the history of the country, made sure that we had an expansion of the child tax credit. Now we're pushing for it to be permanent, but that cut dramatically child poverty, massive investment in our schools. So
they keep mentioning cutting child poverty, but it cut child poverty in half, which means half of the children that were in poverty are still in poverty. And I keep saying that is not a bragging point. You need to uplift all the kids in poverty out of poverty, not just half of them, because that's not fair, like to the other half. So when they brag about that, that is like, that bothers me. Like it really does, because I'm just like, nah, dude, what if your kid was on the other side with the kids that were not uplifted out of poverty? Things aren't good for you. So I don't like that. And even the child tax credit, they ended it short. Remember, they cut it short.
So we got a considerable amount done. And of course, it was our activism that got the president to forgive some of the student loans. Some of us are pushing for even more now.
Actually, because I hear them saying this a lot. You guys remember the gentleman came on, he was a part of the student loan cancellation activist group. He came onto my show. I think this was a couple weeks ago. Alan came on and talked about it. They were the ones that actually were pushing Joe Biden. They had started that. He's been a part of this fight for a long time. So they were actually the ones that were giving that push. And so when I hear like the politicians, like, yes, they did, say to Joe Biden, like, yeah, you need to do this. But the initial push effort came from the activist groups on the outside. It came from a group like Debt Collective, right? It came from the group, the student loan debt group that Alan was a part of. So again, the pushing started from the outside first. And this is a great example. You have to start on the outside with the pressure first to push the politicians on the inside to do something, or to push the person above them to do something. But without the pressure on the outside, it just doesn't happen like that on the inside on its own. So that's important to note.
If there is another way to do it that would meet the criteria of this court, then we'll advocate that. And the president can, I'm sure, use that authority if he needs to. But I think what he has done is legal, and we should be fighting for the legality of what he has done.
Well, no one said what he did was. So here's the thing. Bree didn't say what he did was illegal, from what I remember, but that there were different ways to do this. The HEROES Act, the Higher Education Act. And I have to remind everyone, I talked about this on the Jimmy Dore show, Ayanna Pressley, Elizabeth Warren, and Chuck Schumer, February of 2021, last year, they had already had this meeting and this discussion. They had already had this plan, and I can show you guys this later on as well. They had already had a meeting. And by the way, they had a conference about it, which you could have attended via Zoom. They had already talked about this, and they had laid out the plan. And in that plan, it said for the president to do it through the Higher Education Act of 1965. Now, that was last year. Obviously, the student debt cancellation for 10 to 20K was put forward this year. So they already knew last year how this was supposed to be done. And this is what people need to understand. He already knew it was supposed to be done through the Higher Education Act. So him doing it through the HEROES Act, we're not trying to say it was illegal. What we're trying to say is he didn't follow instructions.
Representative Khanna, of course, no debt has been canceled thus far because of the means-tested nature of it. Conservatives were able to mount these challenges. And even progressive commentators like Judge Sugarman at Fordham Law School have pointed out that under the legal authority that Joe Biden has chosen, it is likely that it's not just that conservative judges will rule against this if it gets to the Supreme Court, but that all judges, this could be a 9-0 decision, because the hook using the HEROES Act, a post 9/11 authority, is a relatively weak one. Do you have any insight into why Joe Biden chose to use the HEROES Act as opposed to using the Higher Education Act, which is the authority under which student loan debt is currently being postponed?
Bingo. Okay, so the HEROES Act, for those who are not aware, that was something that was implemented under the pandemic. Here's the problem. According to the federal government, we are no longer under the emergency status for the pandemic. Joe Biden knows this. He admitted this on a 60 Minutes interview when he said the pandemic is over. Remember that? We're no longer under emergency status anymore. See, that's how they were able to pass things like the American Rescue Act. Because of the pandemic, they were able to prove, oh, a lot of people lost their jobs and, you know, we have to do something for the people. We're under the emergency status. We're not under emergency status anymore. So if you try to cancel student loan debt under emergency status when we're not or no longer under emergency status, of course, someone's going to strike that down. And here's the thing. People say it was a Trump appointed judge. It doesn't matter if it was a Trump. Any judge could have struck that down. So that's the point there. Now listen to what Ro Khanna says about him doing it through the HEROES Act.
You know, I don't know the details of the legal decisions. I mean, my understanding is he asked his lawyers, his legal.
Now let's backtrack. Now he says he doesn't know the details of the legal decisions. But just a minute ago, he told you that what Joe Biden did was completely legal. But he doesn't know the legal detail. Which is it? Because if you don't know the legal details, then how do you know what he did was not considered illegal? You see what I'm saying? This is just a way for Roe to kind of like, let me kind of defend Biden, but also kind of not answer the question. This is what he does.
Legal team, what was the best way to do this? And this was the recommendation. But this is easily fixed. I mean, if there is a better way to do it, I'm sure the administration will. The important thing, though, is to note that many people in the administration still believe that this is a winnable case, and it was a Republican-appointed judge who struck it down. So we need to fight to.
Do you see what I'm saying here? You see what they do? It was a Republican judge who struck it down. Any judge could have struck it down because we were no longer under emergency status. He still hasn't answered the question about the HEROES Act.
To ensure that the Republican Party and their judges aren't taking away student debt relief. And again, if we need something to fix it in Congress in the lame duck, or if the president has other means to do it, then we should be open to that if this fails for some reason.
Okay. See, this is where the red-blue game comes in, because what Khanna's kind of do, he's trying to say, well, it's the Republicans' fault. We wouldn't have had to worry about the Republicans even getting involved if Joe Biden would have followed instructions. That's the problem. If he would have done this the right way, it should have never been means tested. When you means test something, that delays the process. When you delay the process, that gives room for other people to come in and start making complaints. So people who maybe made more than that $125K a year, which was the cutoff, right? They didn't get to apply for this. They don't qualify to apply for the student debt cancellation for the 10K to 20K. They don't get to do that. Here's the problem. If you make 126K, but you live in New York City, or you live in San Francisco, and you have student loan debt, guess what? $126,000 a year doesn't go far in New York City or San Francisco when you have a lot of debt. Rent is extremely expensive in New York City. It is extremely expensive in a city like San Francisco. That's why you don't means test it. They didn't think about the cost of living. They didn't think about that somebody making $125,000 a year that lives in Georgia is doing a hell of a lot better when it comes to paying for rent than someone who's making $125,000 a year and lives in New York City. They didn't think about that. This is why you don't means test it. I said the same thing with the stimulus checks. Just give them to everybody and don't means test it. They tried to means test it. Some people who were supposed to get the checks didn't get the checks. Dead people got checks, stuff like that. They should have just gave it to and we wouldn't have fallen into this situation. But that is why we are where we are now. They really messed this up by means testing it and not doing it through the proper act. And let me tell you something. I want you to know there's a reason why they means tested it. Two reasons. Number one, they means tested it so they wouldn't have to cancel it for more people, right? They didn't want to do that. That's why they put a cap on it. And two, they means tested it because they didn't want to get the socialism label. Because this is the thing, when you don't means test it and you just give it to everyone, then you have the Republicans that come and say, see, I told you they were socialist. Those are the two things that people have to understand. But Ro didn't answer that question. Ro looked a little nervous. I don't know, Ro. I don't know.
Representative, I want to ask you about funding for Ukraine. Obviously, there was this kind of brouhaha over this, what I thought was a perfectly sensible or mild letter from some Democratic House progressives, asking that as we continue to fund Ukraine's defense, that the Biden administration would push for renewed diplomacy, that, it shouldn't be this no strings attached kind of endless support. This is obviously something that some Republicans actually in the House have become very vocal about. It's been interesting to see a kind of, I think, ascendant anti-interventionist faction within the GOP. What are your thoughts on these dynamics? And I know you're someone, a progressive who, probably feels and has voiced opinions.
I don't know what's going on with this thing. 1 second.
On this issue, what is the who wouldn't agree on it?
Okay, Type VNC is doing a thing. 444. I don't know why it's doing this. It wasn't having this problem before. Why does it always have to pause when people are making a funny face? Okay, 444. So he's talking about the letter that was retracted from Ukraine. About Ukraine.
An end to this war via diplomacy.
As you know, I stood by the CPC letter. To me, it seemed pretty vanilla. All it was saying is Putin's war is unjustified, it's unprovoked, it's illegal. We stand with Ukraine, but we want to make sure that we have diplomacy to minimize the risk of the war escalating, to minimize the risk of nuclear confrontation, to minimize civilian casualties. And look, Putin has put 300,000 troops on on the border and in Ukraine, but he can mobilize up to 3 million. And he's systematically striking electricity supplies and utilities in Ukraine. So he is a brutal person, and we should not underestimate how brutal he will be and continue to be. So I have continued to say that I support standing with Ukraine, but I support diplomacy and communication with the Russian counterparts. Lo and behold, it turns out all the generals agree with me. And the New York Times has been filled this last week with general after general saying that that's a prudent approach.
So then to what do you attribute all of the brouhaha about the letter?
I don't know. I think it was much ado about nothing, to borrow the famous Shakespeare quote. I mean,
Ro, you don't get to, no. You don't get to go quoting Shakespeare. For you guys that don't know, like, I took a lot of Shakespeare courses when I was in undergrad. I told you, like, I majored in English and broadcast journalism, so I took a lot of Shakespeare courses. So I'm hearing Ro, like, use the Shakespeare language, and I'm just kind of like, no, please don't. Don't ruin Shakespeare for me. But anywho, if he says that it was nothing to do about nothing, right? He says that letter was basically, oh, I don't know, it wasn't really a big deal. Then why was the letter pulled back? Why was the letter retracted? Why didn't they just keep the letter out there? If it was not a big deal, why did they pull it back? Because I read that letter to you guys, and Pramila Jayapal signed off on it. And in that letter, she mentioned after they realized that Kevin McCarthy had that same opinion, they thought it wouldn't be a good idea to be on the same side as the Republican about that particular issue. And that's why I said this woman is worried about optics. She's more concerned about how it looks. So he may say it wasn't a big deal. I think it was a big deal.
I don't think that the letter was controversial when written. I don't understand why we retracted it. That's why, if you notice, I went on television actually and supported it.
He went on television to clear himself. He went on television to let everybody know, listen, I don't know what everybody else was thinking, but I supported the letter. Khanna was like, you are not going to throw me under the bus with the rest of you guys. I'm going to go out and I'm going to clear my name. And you guys have to fight for yourself. That's what that was about. Time to go do a press tour. I'm about to clear myself away from this one.
Because the letter was not saying anything about funding, actually. And, my position has been voting for every funding package. I've been criticized from people to my left for that. All the letter was saying is that we need diplomacy. We had diplomacy at the height of the Cold War. We would never have convinced Russia, in my view, to leave Afghanistan if we weren't at the same time talking to them while we were arming the Mujahideen. President Reagan engaged in diplomacy. Most of our leaders, Republican and Democrat, have engaged in diplomacy. So I was a bit surprised why that has suddenly become a controversial position.
Well, Representative, I want to switch gears and ask you a little bit about the speakership race. When asked if she would support House Speaker Nancy Pelosi for another term as Democratic leader, or if she herself planned to fight for the seat, Representative Jayapal skirted the question, instead explaining the CPC considers all people who are running and how they match up to the set of things the CPC asks for.
On Monday, you answered that same question by saying that Pelosi deserves the chance to lead after her courage in certifying the 2020 election following January 6th. Can you elaborate on your thoughts here?
Oh, boy.
Well, I think the speaker has shown remarkable courage after the horrific incident on Paul Pelosi. A lot of people would just say, I'm done with politics. She has stayed out there on the battlefield. She also showed courage in certifying the January 6th results. And we've massively overperformed in the election in terms of what people were expecting. So she deserves the chance to say what she's doing. I have no insight into what she wants to do, whether she wants to contest for leadership, whether she wants to stay in the Congress, not in leadership, whether she wants to do something else. But
even if he did know, he's not going to tell us.
From my vantage point, she's earned the right to make that decision.
What do you say to people who might argue that who should be a leader, whether minority leader or majority leader, should be less about their kind of personal deservedness, whether or not they showed courage in the face of 1-6, or have suffered personal tragedy with respect to her husband being, brutally attacked, but instead should be more calculated to the interests of the people, especially if you're speaking from the perspective of a CPC member, what is in the best interest of progressives. Some progressives, like AOC when she was running for office, made a point of saying that Nancy Pelosi doesn't represent her interests and would not get her vote as a default for Speaker of the House. That seemed to have changed in the context of the force the vote discussion during the last speakership vote. What criteria is the exclusive criteria here, whether or not Nancy Pelosi is powerful and deserved on an individual level, or should there be some more consideration for whether or not she is effectively advancing the interests of the left?
Right. Basically, should there be someone in that spot that's actually going to push for progressive policies, or at least allow them to be voted on? Because that was the thing with Nancy Pelosi. She didn't want people to even vote on these progressive policies. She didn't want even people, that was the same thing with Medicare for all. No, I'm not going to bring Medicare for all for the floor for vote. And they didn't even want to try. That's the thing. So it's is there going to be someone, and we'll get into that. Is there going to be someone that is going to take that spot? They would be minority leaders since Republicans have the House instead of Speaker of the House. Is there someone that's going to take that spot that is going to be willing to push for those progressive issues? And also someone that is not so out of touch. And let's just be real here. You look at a lot of the politicians in Congress and the Senate, they've been there for a long time. Some of them been there for too long. And they're out of touch. And they don't really know what people really need and want. And they just don't. Some of them, they've been there for so long, they can't even tell you last time they even talked to a working class person. Some of them been there decades. They can't tell you. They don't remember. So I think that's probably more so what she's asking him here. Now listen to what he says.
Well, there should be a consideration of whether she's effectively advancing progressive ideals and standing up for democracy. I don't think her courage is just about her personal virtues. I think it is about someone tough who's going to take on election deniers, who's going to stand up for democracy, take up and stand up to Kevin McCarthy and some of the extreme elements of that caucus. And I have seen that she is a fighter on those issues. And obviously democracy was on the.
He said democracy twice already. And notice when he talks about who that person is going to be, he doesn't mention progressive policies. He mentions democracy and standing up to the Republican Party.
Ballot this time. I've also seen that she has been able to stand up for a lot of progressive priorities in the negotiation. Some of the other folks in leadership aren't as sympathetic often to progressives. But I guess the question is always
We're going to talk about that when we get into that story, because I'm going to show you something that's a little bit different.
Alternative. And I don't, if someone were to emerge who I thought would do a better job, I'd obviously consider it. But right now, I think that she'd be good.
Is there no one being considered? Because this was a part of the conversation in the last cycle. The pushback against folks who wanted there to be a more competitive race for the speaker said that there was no one in the wings. And that seems to be a problem with the Democratic leadership, which is much older, especially when you look across the aisle at what's going on with Republicans. There are people openly mounting challenges to Kevin McCarthy right now. And Republican leadership generally seems to be more energetic and younger. Is a failure to cultivate or even kind of ask questions about who could replace Nancy Pelosi, causing there to be such a shallow bench on the left?
I don't think so. First of all, I don't think age is a consideration. I mean, I was proud to support Senator Sanders twice, and he's generated record enthusiasm among young people. So I think.
But Senator Sanders is not in the House. Senator Sanders is in the Senate. She's asking you about who would be best to come forward as now minority leader of the House. You see how this works? And Khanna will tell you that he's progressive and he supports these progressive policies, but here he is letting you know on Rising, basically, I don't know of anybody else that would be good at doing this. I don't recommend anybody else. As the progressive there, why aren't you mentioning any of the progressive politicians who are in the House with you? Why are you diverting to Bernie Sanders, who don't even sit in the House? Bernie sit in the Senate.
it's more about a person's convictions and what they want to do than
I would agree.
Whether someone is younger. A number of people who are going to be part of
This thing again, boy, I tell you. Let's try this again.
I mean, I'm not saying anything new. Hakeem Jeffries, Pramila Jayapal, Catherine Clark, Adam Schiff, and Jonah Goose, and that transition is happening, is going to happen. Whether it's for all the positions this time, for some of the positions over the next term or two, you're going to see a whole new generation of people in many of these positions.
Is there any chance, given the very narrow majority Republicans will have in the House, of like all Democrats uniting and peeling off, a couple more moderate or maybe anti-Trump, whoever's left on the Republican side, and unanimously voting for some speaker who's not as far is not as kind of entrenched in conservatism or Trumpism as Kevin McCarthy?
Well, you're talking about the Willie Brown maneuver. Willie Brown in my state of California managed to get elected speaker from the minority. I don't know if we have someone of that political skill hidden.
Willie Brown is Kamala Harris's ex-boyfriend. There's some stories about Willie Brown. I'm not going to get into that tonight. We'll be here for a while if I do.
In our caucus, but it's an intriguing possibility. Look, I'm talking to some of the Republicans with a small group. I don't want to get into the names about how we democratize the House and how we can have rules, at least, that allow members to introduce amendments, members to introduce bills to take to the floor without leadership blocking them. So you could, at the very least, get certain reforms through that members of the Republican caucus want, and maybe we have less centralized power. I think that's a more likely scenario than a consensus speaker emerging.
That would be.
Well, I don't know about all that, Ro. I don't know about all of that, but I will say that he's become very good at answering these questions. He's cracks me up. He's got to this point. He really does crack me up. I do want to say also, I see someone asking about Willie Brown. Willie Brown, okay. Spill the tea, Sabby. Willie Brown is the reason why Kamala Harris got to the point that she is now in reference to her career. Willie Brown, I believe at that time, was married, but he was dating Kamala Harris. And it was kind of like she used him as her way to move up in her political career. That's Willie Brown. Look it up. I kid you not. Google it. You'll see it. Look it up. Good old Will. I'll take those comments on Rockfin, Eric. Boo-boo-boo. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. You know why I know they are not progressive savvy? Because Joy Ann Reid is excited about them. Nuff said. Stan Lee reference in case it missed a couple. And thank you for this tip as well. Yes, Sab, they means tested it because they've been traumatized by the ghost of Reagan and Alex P. Keaton from Family Ties. Means testing for us, but not for Ukraine, and bailouts for their donors. Looks like type B and C must be socialist, seeing it had a bad reaction to Robbie calling Roe a progressive. Oh my God. Even something that is not alive can see through these Dems. We are ruled by a bunch of sociopathic psychotics. Agreed. Seabass Seabrass says, I'm assuming old Willie wasn't for Medicare for all. No, I don't think so. Oh my gosh. And thank you for this tip as well, Roger. Willie Brown is the frog from Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse. I don't know about that. Okay. Allie, Nancy is addicted to making money, ripping off the American people, and just being corrupted. Desert Mantis, I thought Hakeem Jeffries was the selected one. Shh. Pipe down, Desert Mantis. We ain't get there yet. All right. Speaking of which, we're going into our final story, which is, yes, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard about it. Now you're going to see about it. Nancy Pelosi has decided to step down. She will not run for re-election. for Democrat leadership. Now, she would have been running for minority leader since Republicans have taken back the House. She has decided not to do that and bow out gracefully. So let's listen to that speech.
Scripture teaches us that for everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. My friends, no matter what title you all, my colleagues, have bestowed upon me, speaker, leader, whip, there is no greater official honor for me than to stand on this floor and to speak for the people of San Francisco. This I will continue to do as a member of the House, speaking for the people of San Francisco, serving the great state of California, and defending our Constitution. And with great confidence in our caucus, I will not seek re-election to Democratic leadership in the next Congress. For me, the hour's come for a new generation to lead the Democratic caucus that I so deeply respect. And I'm grateful that so many are ready and willing to shoulder this awesome responsibility.
See ya. So she is not going to re-seek Democrat leadership. Now, let's hear what people had to say about this. I want you to hear the discussion here on ABC News, because they talk about Nancy Pelosi's accomplishments, so to say, and they also talk about her past. And there's something that I do want to show you. So I want you to listen to what they say here. And then I want to show you something, a good old gem from the past of Nancy Pelosi, to show you how much she has changed. And I think you need to pay very close attention. Excuse me. I think you need to pay very close attention, because what you're going to see from her past, it's kind of reminds me of AOC her first year. And it's going to show you how people can change. Go ahead and hit that like button, guys. That helps me with the algorithm. Let's gedoodle.
I mean, she's a hugely consequential figure in American politics. The most influential and powerful Speaker of the House in modern times. The Speaker of the House twice, obviously the first woman to be Speaker of the House. But when you look at the last two Democratic presidents, Barack Obama and Joe Biden, the major pieces of legislation that each one of those presidents can lay claim to, big both in terms of dollar amount, obviously, but also in terms of reach and influence on American society, from the Affordable Care Act under Barack Obama, to the infrastructure bill, the efforts to deal with the COVID vaccine. These are hugely consequential bills, and I think it's safe to say that that maybe none of them get done in the way they got done if it weren't for Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi was the person as the Democratic Speaker of the House that pushed those pieces of legislation through. Big New Deal style pieces of legislation that in each one of them, and Kira, you and I both covered the back and forth on all of that. That there were moments of doubt whether each one of those bills would pass, and it was Pelosi who got it over the line.
I don't know why they call it New Deal style, because it didn't. If you look at the New Deal, it didn't come close to that. So that's the impression. She's being praised by a lot of people. The women at The View were acting like Nancy Pelosi passed away or something, the way that they were talking about her and singing her praises. But I want to show you something about Nancy Pelosi, because he talks about progressive legislation. And I saw multiple clips today where people were like, yeah, she really was progressive and she really was a fighter, right? Was she? I'm going to show you a speech from Nancy Pelosi. Now, this is from 1993. So this would have been under the Bill Clinton administration. Here's a clip of Nancy Pelosi on single-payer health care. Listen to what she says here. You tell me if this is the same person.
know how to do it right with single payer the first time.
And now Nancy Pelosi from San Francisco.
Thank you very much, Congressman McDermott, for holding this press conference and for your leadership on the single payer proposal. I remain a staunch and ardent supporter of the McDermott-Conyers bill. I am very pleased with the president's presentation last night. I'm sure others this morning have told you that he made an excellent diagnosis of the problem, and now we have to get on with how we take care of providing health care to all Americans. My problem with the president's proposal, if there is a problem, is that one of the principles of universal access, one of the principles of the single-payer bill is universal access. The president has accepted some of the principles of the McDermott legislation, be it universal access, no precondition, portability, you know, the list goes on and on. But for access to be universal, it must be affordable. And my concern is that at 150% of poverty, a family would have to start paying for its 20% share of the insurance, may not make it affordable to many of the families whose needs it hopes to address.
This is September 23rd, 1993, and this was on C-SPAN. This is under Bill Clinton's administration. And in this speech, you hear Nancy Pelosi saying that even Bill Clinton's policy that he wanted in reference to the healthcare situation didn't go far enough. That it wasn't affordable to those families that are working class or poor that couldn't afford it. Let's go on.
There is already a concession on part of the federal government that a family needs food stamps if they're at 185% of the poverty level. If we admit that people cannot feed their families at below 185% of poverty, how then can we expect them to pay for access to insurance at 150% of poverty?
You see how people change? Where's that Nancy Pelosi?
I think the president has is on the right track. I think the closer he moves toward the single payer, the better. As I've said before, I hope that this plan, and when I say hope, I mean that I will join with my colleagues here in working to see that the plan that the Congress passes contains as many of the provisions of single payer as possible, that it does not foreclose on an eventual single payer, and that it does not throw up obstacles to states easily establishing their own single payer. Once again, I want to commend.
Did you hear that? Let's hear this part one more time. This is important. I want people to really hear what she's saying here. Because I just want to remind people, because, you know, some people don't have good memory all of a sudden, but listen to this.
If they're at 185% of the poverty level. If we admit that people cannot feed their families at below 185% of poverty, how then can we expect them to pay for access to insurance at 150% of poverty? I think the president is on the right track. I think the closer he moves toward the single payer, the better.
The closer he moves towards the single payer, the better.
Said before, I hope that this plan, and when I say hope, I mean that I will join with my colleagues here in working to see that the plan that the Congress passes contains as many of the provisions of single payer as possible, that it does not foreclose on an eventual single payer, and that it does not throw up obstacles to states easily establishing their own single payer. Once again,
that it does not throw up obstacles for states easily establishing their own single payer. Guys, this was 1993. Even back then, they were already talking about single payer on the federal level and the idea of states passing their own single payer. Guys, this is not new. This is what I want people to understand. For people who are trying to do this now, right? For whole Washington trying to implement this trying to do this through the state of Washington, right? Trying to get single payer healthcare for people in Washington state. For people who were trying to do cow care in California, although that was struck down because big money came in and all that kind of stuff. For people trying to get this to happen in Massachusetts right now, well, what I want you to understand, this is not new. This was discussed back in 1993 on national news. But yet, people today who were around back then, like Nancy Pelosi, they want us to feel like we are crazy for wanting Medicare for all. What happened to that, Nancy Pelosi? You see what I mean? The same people who called Bernie Sanders radical for wanting Medicare for all, where were they? Wasn't Joe Biden in office around this time? Nancy Pelosi was in office around that time. So what happened? Why were they acting like Bernie Sanders' idea was so radical when this had already been brought up before?
Again, I want to commend Mr. McDermott and Mr. Conyers for their leadership on this. Thank you.
So we'll have to look up. I do want to look more into this because I want to look more into, I didn't have time today, but I want to look more into McDermott. I want to look more into him and Connors, and I want to try to find that bill. So McDermott and Conyers bill, and find out what happened to what happened. That Nancy Pelosi reminds me of someone like AOC. Nancy Pelosi was progressive once upon a time. And the longer she stayed in office, the more establishment she became, the more corporate she became, the more watered down she became. Pay attention to that. What you just saw right there, that was like a 1990s AOC. And you see what Nancy became. Now, they're already talking about Hakeem Jeffries' possibility of taking Nancy Pelosi's spot. Let's hear what they had to say about that. Now, again, shout out to Case Study QB for this clip as well. They are talking to Ro Khanna here about this situation. Let's hear what he had to say.
How much could your party change without Nancy Pelosi at the helm?
Well, first of all, she has been one of the most consequential people in American politics. I mean, she's someone who saved our economy in 2008 when Paulson came begging to her for the stimulus. She got the Affordable Care Act passed. She stood up against the war in Iraq. She has gotten the biggest climate package. She's historic, and she is extraordinary at the politics. So it's filling the shoes of a giant, and it's an extraordinary loss that we're going to feel for many years to come.
Hakeem Jeffries, who could very well replace Pelosi, shares her willingness to keep far left factions in check. Are you concerned?
So, to keep far left traction in check. Hakeem Jeffries, poised to succeed Nancy Pelosi, would make history. So here's the thing. They want someone to come into her spot to keep the far left in check. And what that tells you is that Nancy Pelosi was also keeping the far left in check. But just remember what I just showed you, the clip prior to this. Nancy Pelosi at one point was on that far left. So in order to move up in these positions in Congress, you got to sell out at some point, bud. You got to sell out at some point. At some point, Nancy Pelosi said, no, we're not going to try to fight for single payer health care. No, we're not going to try to give the people anything, but I'm going to have refrigerators full of ice cream. That's the thing. In order to move, at some point, you have to sell out somewhere. That's how you get to move up. So they want to bring in Hakeem Jeffries so he can keep the progressives in check too. You see how this works? You see why I keep telling you the squad isn't going to be able to get anything done? Because the people in the leadership positions are still there to check their power. So as long as you have those people in those positions, how are you going to you're never going to get Medicare for all. I'm sorry, but we need to be realistic here. Some of you may not want to hear this, but let's keep it real. Khanna told you so himself when he came onto this show. If you don't have a president and a Congress and a Senate that wants Medicare for all, you're not going to get it. All three have to agree. Even if the president wants it, Congress can veto it. So they want to put somebody in her spot to keep the leftists in check so that the progressive policies don't move forward. So I ask this question again. At this point in time, what is the point of having them there? The best chance that they had to really fight back and really stand up was to hold their vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. They missed their moment. They blew it. Let's go back in.
At all what this could mean for progressives. It's a big tent party, and she was successful at keeping that tent together. Not easy.
She was. And at the end of the day, look, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, and the American Rescue Plan, and progressives voted for all of them. And so I think that the narrative that somehow the party is disunified is not true. We've actually been very unified. The party that doesn't have unity is the other side. I mean, that's
the Democratic Party has become unified because the progressives have folded. You see what I'm saying? You see, the progressive, they put all their cards out on the table and then they fold. That's the reason why the Democratic Party is unified, because the progressives had to cave in. It wasn't the other way around. It's not like the corporate Dems said, okay, yeah, we're going to listen to you guys. No, they are unified now because the progressives caved in, and because the progressives, some of them have sold out and they decided not to push progressive policies anymore. They don't want to defund the police anymore. They don't even talk about it. They're not allowed to mention it. Where was all that? That same rhetoric that they had when Donald Trump was in office. Then all of a sudden Joe Biden wins. Now we can't talk about defund the police. You see how this works? As if all of a sudden policing got better because the president is a Democrat? That's the problem that we have. So they're unified because the progressives caved in. That's why they have unity. They weren't supposed to have unity. The Justice Democrats were not supposed to unite. They were supposed to rise up and take over the party. So he's letting you know they got unity. That means they ain't gonna never fight for us.
The honest case. And look at, as you pointed out earlier in the show, all they're talking about is Hunter Biden. And Stephanie, I want to say something. I never attacked, in the 4 years Trump was there, a single person in Trump's family who wasn't in the White House. I went after Jared Kushner because Trump said he's in charge of Middle East peace. But I didn't go after random nieces and nephews. Hunter Biden has nothing to do with government. He's a private citizen, and it is cruel that they're attacking him after all that he's been through in his life. And that is, I think, the modern Republican Party. It's cruelty. And that's what's so frustrating to many of us.
So Hunter Biden is not allowed to be criticized because he went through things in his life?
Then on that very note, I'd like to give you a preview of what Marjorie Taylor Greene herself is thinking about focusing on in the days ahead. Watch this.
I can tell you right now, my district, Georgia 14, is not interested in continuing to fund a war in Ukraine and defending Ukraine's border while our border is being invaded every single day.
You sit on the Armed Services Committee. How much of a battle is there about to be?
Well, that's just highly irresponsible given Putin's bombardment recently of Ukraine and the human rights violations. But we're going to have the votes, and Putin should know we'll have the votes to pass President Biden's aid package to Ukraine, both in the lame duck, and there are Republicans who are going to continue to fund the war. So fortunately, Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't speak for the American public.
Magically, he can tell you that they're going to have the votes to fund another country, but they can't seem to come up with the votes to help people in this country. Interesting. I'm gonna go to some of the comments. We are going to do call in tonight. I need to put that link here and I'll pull it up. Let me go to the comments. I'll take a quick break. Go ahead and hit that like button, guys. And then we'll head into call-in. Angelique, what's up with these married men dating side chicks? Oh, God. The Willie Brown story, I'll tell you guys that another night. There's a whole thing with that. Robert Templeton, she's recently stepping away to allow the next generation of corrupt politicians to destroy our lives. Thank you for the super chat, Roger Meadows. Please, whatever you do, Sab, don't show the views reaction. I wasn't going to show that one. I know you guys hate the view. Bill says AOC will be talking about this again now that the GOP has the House. They talk like this when they are in the minority party and there is a working class discontent. This is the playbook. That's right. Like Rome said, it's easy to appear to be a leftist when the Republicans are the ones in power. Jay Tolbert, she got corrupted. The money talked, period. Yep. Somebody gave her a hell of a lot of ice cream. AJF, Pelosi, Hillary Pelosi, etc. We must accept that there's something and someone class-wise wicked and evil in this country. Note how long again these Dem were on single payer. Their silence and dismissal is disturbing. Thank you for the super chat, AJF. That's right, going all the way back to 1993. Thank you for the super chat, Wendy Melly. You could show Sheraton this Pelosi AOC clip and he will still call us right wingers. LOL. That's funny. He worked at Fox, not me. Thank you for the super chat, AJF. Notice how there's no descriptives about what makes something far left. That's a deflection. And the US left is far left. Bernie is actually a centrist left. Sawant, she's actually left. There you go. Thank you so much for that. If there's something on Rockfin, I want to take that one too. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Laura. Good job, Sabs. Keep it up. Love Eric too. All right. Thank you so much. And thank you for giving like love to Eric as well. He does a lot. He makes things run back here behind the scenes. Especially when I don't know what I am doing behind the scenes. But I'm going to take a quick break. I'll come back.
So how's my sound tonight? Am I sounding all right tonight?
Good.
Sounds good. All right. This is where we give Sabby a little break before we go into call-in. Let's see. I got decent sound tonight. We had sound issues yesterday. I hate when we have sound issues. But we are good, and thanks to Laura and Rockfin for the kind words, and thanks to everybody in the chats. I appreciate that. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about Nancy Pelosi. And let's see, what else was I thinking about? There's one thing is this whole idea that that the Republicans are now like the anti-war party. It's and that's kind of funny, this idea, if the Republicans get in charge, they're not gonna keep voting for the Ukrainian funds. And it's like, that's kind of funny. So I think we all know better than that one. One of the things I would have liked to see a Bree ask old Roe there, would be something, more along the lines of just that it's clear to everyone that Biden has no real interest in canceling student loan debt or doing anything for the 99%. And, why would any working person want to vote for him or want to vote for any of you? And, it'd be interesting to hear Roe answer that question. But then they don't tend to come back on when you ask them tough questions like that. But yeah, we're going to be talking about Pelosi stepping down. I saw in the chat the bye Felicia for Nancy, but of course they'll probably just slide in Hakeem Jeffries. Seems to be the heir apparent, who's very I don't know. It's really the same thing. Of course, the same interests, and it's that same old game that they all serve the same interests. So yeah, Sabby's going to be back here shortly. Let's see. Oh, she's hanging around there somewhere because she put in this chat. All right, here's the call-in link is in the chat. It's also pinned in the chat. So when it comes to call-in time shortly, when Sabby will come back on, and then we all jump over to call-in, and then we're going to be hearing from you there. So you all can start thinking about what you want to say about all this. And let's see. Carrie asking, how did you meet Sabby? Well, actually, I saw Sabrina online kind of the same way you guys did. And I just kind of started saying, well, if you need some help, maybe I can help. And I would encourage anybody out there who, if there's a YouTuber out there or a group that you like and that you feel that you can help, whether it's in technical ways or other ways, to reach out and see if you can join and help. All right, let's see. Another thing that I've heard that makes sense to me is that during the COVID shutdowns, and they sent everybody home, and they were, of course, too afraid to even hold sessions in Congress. And we won't get into the details of the reason. There are not reasons for that on YouTube. But during that time, basically, from what I've heard, Pelosi basically ran the House as like this one woman operation, and she basically drew up bills and just had them ready. They would kind of go in for these quick sessions and vote them through, and then run away again. And it was really an incredible amount of power that she had during that time that I think kind of goes unappreciated. And so she's probably missing those days, and she'll go home to her ice cream and her millions. And to Paul, she has to get back to Paul and hang out with him, I'm sure. But let's see. So then there's this general question of like when you get a Ro Khanna on, how do when it gets digging down into these things, they should have used this statue or this other statue, and it gets into these technical conversations, and that just benefits the Dems and the power structure and the whole game. And this is why I keep talking on and on about demands and about having a list of really turned up, uncompromising demands. And so even something like Medicare for all is a compromise, and we should be demanding, single payer national health care for all, a national NHS that just covers everyone and stops messing around. And you can go down the whole list of things. And if you have that, then when you're talking to someone like a Ro Khanna or any of these ghouls, then it just clarifies the whole conversation, because you're saying, you'd be saying to them, you're not even trying to give us health care for all or a national NHS, but say bye Felicia to that and to them. And, because these are really not close calls. I mean, when it comes to Ukraine, I mean, you just shouldn't be, pushing billions out to there. I like what Bree's doing a lot of in general on the Hill, but I really have to wonder, could she really ask Ro Khanna, how can you be sending billions to Ukraine and when our cities are falling apart, could she really do that and keep that job? But I mean, she does good on there with what she is asking and is doing. So it is kind of conflicting on there. Let's see. So then there's also that whole question of the Freedom Caucus versus the so-called Progressive Caucus, and that's another thing. I mean, there is no Progressive Caucus because there are no progressives in Congress. Let's just start being clear about that. And so, they all serve the same masters. That's all it comes down to. All right, I think our Sabby Sabs is ready. Let's do a little swapperoo here to jump back in and jump into call-in.
Whoops. Well, got a wardrobe malfunction. Okay, all right. Let's head on over to call in, guys. I'm going to go ahead and put the thing up here. All right. Episode 56, Pelosi steps down. Nancy Pelosi has decided to step down as Speaker and not re-seek leadership. Hakeem Jeffries will most likely resume her role. Will this help progressive policies? So that's the discussion tonight. I will see you guys over there, and I hope you guys have a great weekend. Next week, Andrew Yang will be here. Max Blumenthal will be here. Should be an exciting week. See you guys on Monday. And thank you for this tip, Laura. Good job, Sabs. Keep it up. Love Eric too. Yeah, I said that one. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. All righty. Okay. Is there another one, I think? Oh, thank you for the tip, David. Unified in quotes. I know, right? We're unified, man. All right, guys. Have a good night. Keep up the fight. Head on over to call in. It's pinned to the top of the chat. See you guys there.